Hey, I'm just going to try to talk to you a little bit more about elements and principles. I know this is really sometimes challenging, shall we say, to wrap your head around. But this is like I tried to explain, this is like learning a new language. It's like learning new verbs, new adverbs, new grammar, okay? So that's why you may be stumbling a little when you're trying to use these. Now, we talked about earlier when I gave you these particular terms, when we're talking about these and we're talking about their properties over here, I don't mean when I say use them to describe, I don't mean that you try to use them all in a sentence, like the lines are good, the color's brilliant, the shapes are wonderful, and it all makes it look good. That doesn't tell me or you or anybody who reads it anything about the piece. So, what I'm going to try to do is talk a little bit more about composition. Now, these are black and white illustrations. These are from it's a classic kind of textbook thing. It's called the Meier art test, and it's about art judgment. But it's all predicated on these elements and principles and how they're used, all right? So let's go back a bit. Here are our elements, and I can certainly, scroll this around and you can see where the principles are as well. This is that list that's in assignment 2 at the bottom there of, I think, the video. You can download this and bring it up, and it should help you some on trying to figure out what these are. Let's look at some of these examples, though, that I pulled up for you, okay? These are, like I said, from that Meier art judgment test. Now, this is one composition, this is the other composition, and then you can see it's like those tests we used to take in the funny papers where you would see what's different or what's the same. Well, obviously in this piece here, what you've got primarily is this funny little pipe that goes across here. Everything else is pretty much the same in the two compositions. But now what this pipe does is it gives you that wonderful kind of implied line that, look, pushes your eye right back to this picture. The vertical line brings you right down to I guess the cup and maybe a top or a sugar bowl. And then the edge of that suitcase takes you right back to this again. So look at all the lines. Now this is obviously setting up continuation. Remember, that's one of those things when we talked about unity. That's one of those things. Repetition, continuation, where your eye is directed throughout a composition, and proximity. Now, proximity, if you ask me, and not that you did, but if you ask me, I would say proximity is a pretty big point in this as well, okay? That's talking about composition. That's the first example. Second one is this one right here. And look at the focal points here. Oh my gosh, obviously here the artist wants you to look at the two. Now I'm guessing this may be maybe Mary and Saint Anne. I don't know. I'm not familiar with this painting offhand, and it's a black and white reproduction and just a little bit of it, so it's hard for me to tell exactly. But anyway, in the composition, look at the difference between trying to achieve focal point with the two. And another thing that's going on, look at the contrast in this piece. You up that contrast and things are very clear and dramatic all of a sudden. Here you're not real sure. You see the picture okay and the drawing's okay. It's just that it's not as clear maybe. This makes it clear. The focal point clearly are these two figures. How? Well, look how they're contrasted against and isolated against that background right there. And if we went back again to our terms, how do we create things like focal point? Well, isolation, contrast, and placement. And I submit to you at this time that probably in this composition, it's a little of all of them. Isolation against that plain background. Contrast, the dark figures, a light background. Placement, look how those lines direct your eye to these figures. So I think that works pretty good too. All right, that should help you a little bit on that. Now, if we were talking about unity, I think you could look at unity again, back to our little terms here. Unity talks about repetition, continuation, and proximity. Which would this be? Well, not repetition really, is it? Continuation, maybe. You see how your eyes are forced down to that? And then these two figures link to each other. The arm, the implied line as one looks to the other. The arm almost points you back up here. The figures point you back up here. So I would put a real good case here for continuation, I think. Proximity in the sense that the two figures are together, but certainly, and they are connected to the background, but I don't think that's quite as strong. But I'll tell you what, if you gave me one and not the other, as long as you give me your reasons, I think you're going to get pretty far with it. And here's another composition, and look, take a second and look at the differences in the two. Pretty much the same one in both of them. If you were addicted to those comic strips like I was, you'd say, oh, well, this is a little different. Look, that line goes across here, it doesn't go across there. Look, this is a little different up here. There are minor differences, certainly, but I think the big difference is look how this particular object, now my guess is it's some kind of maybe a trash can sitting out or maybe it's a window, if that whole thing. Yeah, that must be the side of the building, so this must be a window, and it's darkened there. Look how it isn't here. You know, so in this piece, because of the way these lines are implied and kind of lead your eye to this direction, you kind of focus on that. Now, it's not very interesting, but you're forced to look at it. On this piece, where it's not as, I guess, attention-getting, it's not as dark, certainly, and for some reason, because I guess the extra dark here instead of this white space, you don't see this as a line necessarily pointing. What you see is a direction maybe more like this. And you find that you become very interested here in what's going on inside this composition. Now, one better than the other? Well, in my mind there is. Probably you have an opinion as well. I think the point here is to show you how you can use things, and that's the point, of course, of taking the course, is to understand how you can make elements and principles help you be more effective as a visual provider. Okay? Hope this helped a little bit with these terms. You know, again, go to this list, use it as a guideline, and let me hear from you if there are some questions that I didn't answer or some points you're not clear on. All right? Well, all the best, and I'll look forward to seeing your work online.